Okay, I think we may start. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's already 10:05, and we can start today's circular talk of the leadership group on construction infrastructure on primary and secondary construction and infrastructure materials market. My name is Hubert Bukowski from Innowo Institute Poland, and I'll be your moderator today. I'm sure everyone agrees that the development of secondary materials market is one of the key issues necessary to attain circularity in the construction sector. Today, we'll try to answer what opportunities are available for the secondary materials market development. We'll try to identify the barriers. We want to take a look at legislation and tools to broaden secondary materials use and consequently make circular construction possible. Can we go to the next slide, please? So as I already said, today's circular talk was prepared by the Leadership Group on Construction and Infrastructure of European Stakeholder Platform on Circular Economy, with the coordination of ENEA, actually, while the whole group is coordinated by Holland Circular Hotspot. ENEA is a national agency for new technologies, energy, and sustainable economic development from Italy. It's a public body aimed at research, technological innovation, and provision of advanced services to enterprises. And ENEA was joined by alchemia-nova in this task to develop the today's circular talk. And alchemia-nova is an organization that develops broad projects ranging from bioeconomy to also construction, and also the circular talk was prepared with our help. I mean, the Innowo Institute from Poland, a think tank that is focusing on circular development in Poland as well as in Europe. And before we start, let me tell you about the meeting rules. When connecting, please enter your first name, surname, and organization. I am sure you already noticed that the event is recorded. I hope that nobody is against this. If you are, please, unfortunately, you should lead the meeting, but I hope that nobody won't. That's our problem, I think. And now, if you have any questions, post them on the chat. We'll have the question and answer. Sorry, there's this. Someone has a mic on. Okay. If you have any questions, please post them on the chat section. That's there's a button up on the Microsoft Teams app. And what I would prefer actually is that after all of the presentation, we hope, because we won't have the question and answer session until the end of the presentations, please raise your hand and then we will give you the floor to actually pose the question to yourself. So this would make the discussion more lively. I hope so, actually. Okay, let's get to the next slide. So as you can see, we have a tight schedule today with very prominent guests. So without further ado, let's begin. I would like to give the floor to Laura Kotaria from ENEA for a few words of introduction. Please, Laura.
Yes. Thank you, Hubert. Can you see my screen, Paula?
We can see it, but okay. There's this echo.
So, thank you very much. I'm going to summarize what happened during the last session, during the previous session. This is, maybe Paula, can you go? Okay. As Hubert mentioned, we plan to do this twin session. The first one dedicated to the value chain collaboration and the understanding the potential of collaboration between value chains. The second one dedicated to the market, to understanding how the market can boost the circular economy in these sectors, construction infrastructure. Next, please. 2 days ago, we did the first session on value chains collaboration, and we get some contribution from different stakeholders, different speakers. I'm going to summarize this, what the outcome of this first session, given that at the end we will produce a sort of outcome paper summarizing the general framework of construction infrastructure sectors, and also the outcomes, main outcomes coming from these 2 days circular talks. The first note is that according to the speech we had 2 days ago, the industry looks prepared, but also looks willing to make this circular economy happen. They are willing to contribute to this approach, but also they are willing to be prepared and to be also helped by the association, by the commission, by local governments to this transition. We also had some presentation from different value chains, such as steel, cement, concrete, gypsum, and demolition value chains. They are also confirming that there is a potential, but also a needs and demands to collaboration, the circular symbiosis in the circular economy, in the data symbiosis perspective. And there are still some limits, there are still some problems that have to be solved, but these value chains are at the moment, again, willing to move in this direction. On the side of reuse and recovery of buildings material components, emerged that is still a big market gap between the possibility of really an effective use of old and used part of buildings and components, because the market is not yet prepared. New materials, new components are more convenient. So probably some action will be needed to let this market go. Next slide, please, Paula. There is some problem, despite the common EU framework in terms of legislation. Speakers, but also comments, show that there is still significant difference in the implementation of regulation, and in particular in the use of secondary materials, recycling, recovery, and so on, between member states. So, despite the common framework, in the application, the day-by-day application, there are still many differences, many problems that face stakeholders, but also players in front of different problems depending on the country where they work. Legal framework still represent a limit to the sharing and exchange of resources of construction materials coming from waste or coming from the use. And in particular, end of waste application, end of waste implementation often makes not easy to work with secondary materials. Again, end of life implementation still has country by country difference, so it's for the players it's also difficult to understand and to adapt to each country's specific rules, because each country has also in this regard different rules. It happens, for example, levels could be a useful tools as levels or similar can be useful for the implementation of circularity approach and also circularity tools, as well as the monitoring of the environmental and circularity performance. According to the talking about the end-of-life management of materials, and in particular of materials coming from demolitions, emerge that some policies, such as, for example, in Italy, the bonus for refurbishment in Italy, but also the Renovation Wave, can pose some problems because of the production of small amounts of construction demolition waste that are difficult to intersect, they are difficult to valorize. So in this regard, these policies maybe could need some specific action in order to avoid the dispersion of huge amount of construction demolition waste, and in order to valorize them properly. There is still a need for a stronger channel of collaboration among the different actors, and in particular between education, in particular higher education, but I would say also between also any level of education for this value chain, research and association, as well as designers, in order to make the value chain of construction infrastructure move towards the circularity and also at the same time being sustainable. Every point of this value chain must improve its knowledge, its capacity, its willingness to move towards this new approach. Paola? During the last 2 days ago Circular Talk, we did 2 polls. The first one was about the perception of value chains mechanism for stakeholders. Among stakeholders were mostly represented academic research, then designer and professional, and then companies, NGOs, and public administrations. Next, please. To the question, in your opinion, in which of the following stage of the construction value chain there is the strongest collaboration? Responded that the most was probably in the construction materials phase, the production, the end-of-life management, and the construction phase in the planning, design and commissioning, and logistics. and so on. The second question was about the collaboration with the construction sector, with other construction value chains. The results were quite surprising because the most important sector, according to the answer, was the manufacture of rubber and plastic products and other non-metallic mineral products, followed by manufacture of basic metals, mining, quarrying, and so on. This survey is not, of course, complete and very big because people was not so many, but we guess that probably we could try to understanding maybe in the future how the relation between along the value chain and between the value chain and the others can be as is perceived, but also as it can be boosted and how. Next, please. Okay, during the circular talk, we also had this pool, which is which we proposed also today. This will be open from now to the end of the pool. I invite you all to contribute using Slido. Slido, you have to go to Slido in a web Slido and put this code on it, and then answer at your preference, Paula. Now we are going to open this circular talk on the issues relating to the market of primary and secondary building materials in order to understand how the market can be, which is the role of the market, and also the barriers and levers for the circularity. Here listed some notes, some barriers already reported in our background document. I'm going just to list them, but there are points of discussion of today. So the first one is competitiveness of recycled materials with reference to the price according to the primary ones. Acceptance of recycled materials, but also I would like to say also acceptance of reused materials. Management and technological criticality affecting secondary materials, and information and traceability. I would say the big word of data of these primary and secondary materials. Levers to increase circularity can be public procurement or procurement in general, tender, circular procurement, certification standards of products and materials, policy and fiscal policies, and digitalization, cioè the world of tools of ICT world that can be used in order to knowing better what we have, understanding better the stakeholders of this world, and also connect stakeholders and availability and needs of materials in order to optimizing better their use, their mining, their planning during the time. Paula? Okay. We can also invite you again to open the Slido window and entering this code in order to contribute to this first poll. And thank you very much. I'm going to give the floor again to Hubert.
Thank you very much, Laura, for summarizing the main outcomes of the first circular talk. I hope that the second one is going to be as fruitful as the first one. And now I would like to ask Mr. Aurel Larentiu-Plășanu for the
Hubert, we cannot hear you.
You cannot hear me?
We can hear you. We can hear you.
Okay,
we can hear you, yeah.
So yeah, once again, I would ask Mr. Aurel Larentiu-Plășanu, a member of the employers group of the European Economic and Social Committee. He's currently also the president of the Secretary section for Employment, Social Affairs and Citizenship. So may I ask for opening remarks? The floor is yours, Mr. Plășanu.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much indeed for your invitation. Distinguished colleagues, I hope you are hearing me well. And it is a privilege for me to participate in this debate today and to have an opening speech. Let me tell you that having been referenced in the 2020 Circular Economy Action Plan, the construction sector has a significant impact on many sectors of the economy, on local jobs and quality of life. It requires vast amount of resources and accounts for about 50% of the extracted material. The construction sector is responsible for over 35% of the EU's total waste generation. Greenhouse gas emissions from material extraction, manufacturing of construction products, construction and renovation of buildings are estimated at 5 or 12% of total national greenhouse gas emissions. Greater material efficiency could save 80% of those emissions. Under these terms, the transition to a circular economy is essential for a more sustainable and more robust European economy. Recognizing the need to bring stakeholders from the field in one place, the European Commission and the ESC have launched a joint initiative known as the European Circular Economy Stakeholder Platform, which is today's event co-host. As many of you may already be aware, the platform is a European one-stop shop for the circular economy community. It is a place for dialogue and a bridge between existing circular economy initiatives. In fact, the content on the website comes from you, the stakeholders, with the debate continuously being nourished online through our communication channels such as Twitter, LinkedIn, and also our newsletter. As the exchange concept of the European Circular Economy Stakeholder Platform, the EU Circular Talks are the best forum for stakeholders to come together and exchange their ideas and practices in specific fields, such as the market for secondary raw materials. This is exactly what the Commission and the ESC had in mind when they launched ECESP 1 year ago, a platform facilitated by the European level, but driven by stakeholders on the ground. This is why the initiative by ENEA, Innowo, and alchemia-nova to focus this on the construction sector is particularly welcome. Apart from its active role in this platform, the ESC acts as a driver for sustainability while identifying the barriers through its opinions. It is in its role as consultative body to the EU institutions. The committee organized thematic exchanges with a wide range of civil society actors and prepares opinions on issues related to the circular economy, drawing on input from experts in the employees, and various interests groups. One example is the ESC opinion on the Renovation Wave for Europe. We are calling it 10.723, greening our buildings, creating jobs, improving lives. In this opinion, the committee welcomes the European Commission's proposal and gives recommendations on all aspects linked to enhancing the EU resilience on this topic. In this context, given the strategy's specific nature and its trajectory to 2050, we have urged the Commission to set a clear, stable, and tailored legal and financial framework by deploying a dedicated European Investment Fund, multi-annual investment plans, and a new green semester. Also, we have stressed that the Commission needs to put in place incentives for the development at local level of the industrialization and mass rollout of energy efficiency renovation processes, and at the same time to establish a new Erasmus for energy efficiency renovation 2050. The industrialization must go hand in hand with the new construction models based on appropriate technical requirements and construction standards. These messages echo the recommendations the ESC has also recently made concerning the new Circular Economy Action Plan. We had an opinion in 895 where we have highlighted the focus on the sectors that use the most resources and where the potential for circularity is high, such as construction and buildings. We are now starting an opinion on the European Bauhaus, about which you will hear more from the Confederation of Danish Industries later in today's debate. And we are looking forward to the Commission's upcoming legislative proposal on the energy performance of building directive before the end of this year. Beyond the ESC's work, public authorities and business associations, for instance, can help develop economic incentives to transition to the circular economy adapted specifically to foster the development of a circular construction and infrastructure sector. Speaking about some examples of good practice, and maybe you can help us with the 2 slides we have prepared. Let me emphasize only the effective recycling concrete technology, where the aggregates from 100% recycled CDW do not compromise on quality. And the second example is related with the Eco-Veneta construction and demolition waste, which goes back to construction sites for a new adventure. Who is interested in order to find more, please access the site on these elements. Let me come to the end of this presentation and telling that for the stakeholder platform to be more useful to a wider audience, more practices are needed to enrich the existing range of good practices in construction. With stakeholder-driven content on this website and 5,000 followers on Twitter, regular uploading of these good practices is essential to keep the conversation going and to avoid repeating lessons which have already been learned in the industrial symbiosis. Let me inform you also that I have been involved in the construction sector matter for the last 2 decades as the president of the Romanian Association of Building Contractors, and also being in touch closely with the European Federation of the Construction Industries. Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I would like to leave the floor to the next speaker, thanking you once again for the privilege to be with you today and looking forward also to a very fruitful exchange. Thank you very much once again.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brosciano. Thank you especially for underlining the need for cooperation among all circular economy stakeholders and the role of platform in this matter. And also thank you for saying a few words about the legislation that is upcoming on the EU level. And I think Mr. Philip Mosley, who works at the European Commission Director General for Internal Market, Industry, Entrepreneurship and SMEs, will tell us more about this. He is responsible for policies relating to the competitiveness of the construction industry, focusing on energy and resource efficiency aspects. Mr. Mosley, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'll just share my presentation. I guess you can see it now.
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can see it.
Good, thank you. So yes, I'm working in DG Grow in the construction unit there. It's very nice to be with you today. Now then, let me just go to my first slide. There we are. So, I mean, we've already heard some statistics of the impact of construction, but also the economic importance of construction is very clear. It contributes 10%, almost 10% of the EU value added. It employs around 25 million people in over 5 million firms. And at the same time, construction accounts for about half of Europe's extracted resources and over a third of the total waste generated per year. So it's a very important sector for Europe, not only economically but also environmentally. And therefore, it's clear that construction needs to undergo a twin green and digital transition. And on the 5th of May 2021, the Commission adopted an update to the EU industrial strategy, which set out a new industrial path for Europe. And construction is one of the 14 industrial ecosystems identified in the strategy. And what the strategy is doing is to modernize the industry, to improve productivity and provide new job opportunities, but at the same time reducing the environmental impact. And the Commission is working with the industry now to create an opportunity or a business case for the success of industry in this transition period. And in fact, just 2 days ago, on the 28th of September, we had the high-level construction forum where we kicked off the process to co-create a roadmap for a transition pathway for construction. And we're doing this in partnership with not only the industry, but also with the public authorities, the member states and other stakeholders. Now, this slide shows some of the ongoing action that we have that are relevant to circularity in construction. We have, on the one hand, the Circular Economy Action Plan, and there are a couple of ongoing actions there on looking at waste reduction targets for streams and other measures on waste prevention, and another action on scoping the development of possible EU-wide end-of-waste criteria and byproduct criteria. And then we also have some actions under the Renovation Wave. We have this 2050 roadmap to reduce the whole life cycle carbon emissions of buildings. We have an action to review material recovery targets, support the internal market for secondary raw materials, and then also actions on green public procurement. So there are several ongoing pieces of work there in the Commission. And in fact, addressing the whole life cycle of greenhouse gas emissions can act indirectly to support circular approaches, or even directly, in fact. And the full life cycle of construction and buildings is getting more and more attention at EU policy level. Just the act of calculating the life cycle emissions of construction works can highlight the issue and focus minds, but also drive demand for circular solutions, including more demand for secondary materials. And on the slide, you see some of the actions that are looking at life cycle greenhouse gas emissions. We already had it in the levels framework with a specific indicator, but and we have the roadmap that I've mentioned, but also now in the Fit for 55 legislative package that came out just before the summer, there are a couple of articles in the Energy Efficiency Directive that now, for the first time, address the life cycle impact of renovation in buildings. In order to meet the EU's climate and energy targets for 2030 and to reach the objectives of the European Green Deal, it's vital that we direct investments towards sustainable projects and activities. And to achieve this, we need a common language and a clear definition of what is sustainable. And this is why the Action Plan on Financing of Sustainable Growth has called for the creation of a common classification system for sustainable economic activities, the so-called EU taxonomy. And we had already the first criteria on climate change adaptation and mitigation published. And now in August of this year, we had the platform of sustainable finance, which is a platform of stakeholders with the Commission, published its draft proposal for recommended technical screening criteria for the other 4 priority areas of the taxonomy: circular economy and also water pollution and biodiversity. This has been out to consultation online, and now the platform is aiming to prepare a report to the Commission in November, and then we'll see what happens after that. But at the moment, there are some criteria in there for circular economy in construction. Now, we published in 2020 some guidance on circular economy principles for building design. The guidance was aimed at a range of target groups, including policymakers as well as technical actors in the value chain. And we've now followed this up very recently this year with a study of policy options, and which you can see on the slide here, the link to it. And among the options presented in the study are to integrate circular economy in the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, in the Construction Products Regulation, in GPP criteria and green public procurement, and also to develop some more guidelines for urban planning for local and regional authorities. And there are other recommendations in that report to do with research and innovation, standardization, and many of the other issues that we've already heard about today. Now, the Construction Products Regulation is undergoing a review right now, and what it does is it lays down harmonized rules for the marketing of construction products in the EU market. It provides a common technical language to assess the performance of construction products, and it ensures that reliable information is available, so the performance of products from different manufacturers in different countries can be comparable. It's undergoing the revision now to improve several things. One, the functioning of the EU single market for construction products, but also importantly to better integrate sustainability requirements into the data that comes in construction products. So that review is ongoing. I think it's due to go on the rest of this year until the end of the year, but we're hoping that through this review there will be much better harmonized data available on the impacts of construction products. It's my last slide. We have a number of funding programs which are putting money into the circular economy in construction. This is a kind of from big to bigger to even bigger amounts of money. But starting with the biggest, we have the Next Generation EU 800 billion euros of temporary recovery instrument to rebuild Europe from the pandemic. And the centerpiece is the Recovery and Resilience Facility with 723 billion euros in loans and grants to support reforms and investments in the member states, and focusing on being prepared for the green and digital transition. And we've calculated that at least 61 billion euros of that, of the national recovery and resilience plans, are being earmarked for construction, most of it for renovation of buildings. Then we have the Horizon Europe Fund for Research and Innovation, which has several areas relevant to circular economy in construction. One of them under Cluster 4 is called A New Way to Build, with some topics on digital logbooks for buildings, digital permitting in construction, and also tools to valorize construction demolition waste. And then also in Horizon Europe, there's the Built for People partnership, which is a partnership looking at the whole value chain of sustainable buildings to drive innovation forward. And then there's also the LIFE program, which looks more at projects on the ground as well. So those are important EU funding opportunities. That was my last slide. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll be happy to participate in the discussion later on, and I wish you a nice event. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mosley. I think that from a presentation we can all tell that this is a multi-layer approach, and it's really not easy to make circular construction happen, but I hope that we'll manage somehow. And I think that Mr. Gert Couperus, who will be presenting next, who is the Secretary General of FIR, Fédération Internationale du Recyclage, will tell us more, especially on the specific topic on explaining how recycling of construction demolition waste and markets for recycled aggregates can be developed. Mr. Couperus, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Sharing my screen right now. I hope this. Okay, my screen should be there, I hope. Good morning, everyone, colleagues. It's my pleasure to present at this webinar. And I would like to give you an insight in the world of recycling, mainly of construction and demolition waste, and tell about the situation we are in at this moment and how we think the situation all over Europe could improve. Just a short introduction. We are the International Recycling Federation. We represent the recycling industry of construction demolition waste, but also the recycling industry of incinerated bottom ash. And below you can see the member states and the countries that we have, where we have representation. And actually, you may wonder why there are not more countries involved in our association. And actually, to be honest, I think that is the reason is that recycling in Europe is not developed well in all regions. So there's still a task ahead of us, I think. Our members are our national recycling associations in these member states. We also have individual recycling companies. And what we see today is that still a lot of entrepreneurs are striving to develop recycling, but they still have some bottlenecks to come across. Our aim actually is to achieve high quality recycling in Europe. That's the main aim, or even globally, that's the main aim we want to achieve. And for that, we also disseminate our information and knowledge, because we think that proper high quality recycling of construction demolition waste is well achievable in all member states. We have frequent meetings in our association, of course, and thanks to the improved situation of digital meetings, we have quite a lot of meetings. And this issue of, let's say, the comparison between well-performing countries and countries where it is still in development is always a point of discussion. We see this happening. We see that the member states where high quality recycling is happening at this moment, which are only just 4 or 5 at this moment, they have other issues, they have other questions, they have other things to deal with. And several other member states are catching up with recycling. We can see that, but they are facing other issues than these high quality recycling performing member states. The member states that are still developing and catching up, they are still in need of proper legislation and proper tools, proper protocols to achieve good quality recycling. And I really wished I could tell another story, to be honest, because we are all hopeful and optimistic about the circular economy, but we also have to face the facts, I think, where we are now at this moment. And we are catching up, I think. I see things happening in many member states, also member states that are not represented in our association, but there's still a long way to go, I think. There are some issues that need to be repaired, like, for instance, we need to have reliable statistics, of course. If you do not have the reliable statistics, you don't know where you are and where you have to go. We also know that there are issues of backfilling and even illegal dumping. These are things we should get rid of course, and that should be repaired. What we think is that recycling of construction and demolition waste is very well achievable in all member states. Why is that? That's actually because if you look at recycling of waste, the cost for recycling of inert C&D waste is the cheapest form of recycling. It is not expensive. It is actually quite a simple recycling operation, and it can be done everywhere. It is not expensive, and what you get from recycling of inert construction and demolition waste are recycled aggregates that actually perform as well as primary aggregates. And we know, of course, because the same European standards, product standards apply to our aggregates as for the primary aggregates. So they perform as well. And a major issue, of course, and a major item of discussion is very often what about the environmental impacts of using waste-derived materials. I think I can safely say that in the 30 or even more than 30 years of experience in the 4 or 5 member states that are performing well, we have never seen any problem with leaching of any substance and an incident of environmental impact. The leaching of recycled aggregates is really below every standard and limit value in those countries. And there have been extensive statistical analysis of it, but we can really safely say that recycled aggregates produced in an appropriate way are very safe to use. So actually there is no reason to start with it. Why doesn't it start everywhere? I think this is actually the summary of all basic knowledge we have of recycling. You can only recycle materials if you have input to a recycling facility, if you have a proper recycling facility that produces good quality materials, and if you have good sales of your recycled materials. If either of these 3 issues is lacking, you do not have recycling. And that means you first need to have your input, and that means we need legislation. We need proper legislation in all member states, diverting waste from landfill or even worse, to a recycling facility. If this is not there, you will not have recycling. But also the recyclers themselves have a big task, of course. They need to assure the good quality of materials. And in the 4 or 5 member states that perform well, you see that there are quality assurance schemes, there are certification schemes, and the material coming out of it is well trusted. It is well accepted by the clients. And as for sales, we have seen that green public procurement prescribing the use by public authorities has supported the good quality recycling in those member states. So this is also important. And again, if one of these 3 issues is lacking, we do not have recycling. So one issue that came up, of course, also in the previous discussions of these webinars is how about the acceptance of recycled aggregates? And generally, we can say that in the 4 or 5 well-performing member states, there is no issue about acceptance. There is full acceptance, full recognition of the good quality of the material. It can be used safely, but that is based on the fact there is an integral framework of legislation, protocol standards, etc. for all steps. So the whole value chain, there are rules how to perform, what to do, etc. So we know that what comes out of the system is acceptable, is good, etc. So this integral framework needs to be there. And this integral framework, by the way, we have described in this brochure a 10-step approach to achieve good quality recycling. But the most important thing, I think, is that the public authorities must be willing to achieve good quality recycling. If there is no willingness of the public authorities, of the governments, and that is actually what we see happening in Europe, if the willingness is not there, it doesn't happen. If the willingness is there, then we can roll out the whole approach we have identified, the 10-step approach with all information behind it to achieve good quality recycling. And this can be done in just a few years. That's not a problem, but the willingness must be there. Where we see member states developing, you see that there is still a bit of a hesitation to use materials. And why is that? There are several reasons. In the first place, of course, the whole framework, as I mentioned, is not there. So we do not know exactly what quality is, what the environmental performance is, what the rules are for application, etc. So the framework must be there. And we have the framework, by the way. We know what the framework should look like. We also see that very often there is a case-by-case decision in concrete projects, for instance. In a very concrete project, the decision is made, can we use the material, yes or no? If you have national rules for application of secondary materials, for instance, related to leaching, then you have a framework and you do not rely on a case-by-case decision. And of course, there is the fact that the materials, clients, authorities are not always familiar with these new secondary materials. That is an issue, of course. There is suspicion, is this material reliable? Does it perform well? Does it not lead to environmental impact? These are questions, of course, that are risen, and we can give answers to all of the questions, I think, because we know so much about the products. They are reliable, but we need, of course, to answer these questions. And finally, an important point is that in several member states, it is not allowed to use waste, for instance, in road construction or anywhere else. So that is, of course, hindering the use of these materials. So how can we proceed in Europe and with recycling of construction and demolition waste? What we think is that recycled aggregates, they are safe. There is really no reason for doubt. There is doubt, of course, but we can show that the materials are safe and sound to be used. So, but there must be a platform to be able to show this. That means that member states must be starting to use materials. For instance, by first performing pilots, convincing themselves that it is trustworthy, etc., and finally to prescribe the materials. This is the way it went in the 4 to 5 member states. They started just with pilots, just convincing themselves, etc. So, but it is a matter of just starting. There's no reason not to start. And the waste criteria, it has been mentioned many times, of course. They are a prerequisite in many cases. It is conditioned to have end of waste. Otherwise, it is not allowed legally to use it. So we see at this moment that at least 3 to 4 member states and our colleagues in these member states are discussing national end of waste criteria, but it is not going very well, I must say. There's no solution at this moment, and the people have been talking about it for many years, actually. So there is no solution as yet. Another thing is, which I would like to highlight, the fact that we have the issue of asbestos. This may give rise to questions and to concerns, and that is there's good reason for that, of course. We should not accept asbestos, but we must realize that it is impossible to recycle construction and demolition waste without having any asbestos in recycled materials. That is impossible. So if we do not accept asbestos, we do not have recycling, but we can manage asbestos very well. There are examples, for instance, in the Netherlands, in Flanders, where they are managing very well the issue of asbestos, and there is no reason to have concern about recycled materials. But this is a major fact. And of course, I think that everywhere in Europe, we should use the existing experience we have in these 4 to 5 member states. So my last slide, just to highlight some things I think are relevant to address at EU level. First of all, there is the discussion going on setting targets for specific fractions in construction and demolition waste. We would really argue for setting a target for inert construction and demolition waste. This would really help the recycling of construction and demolition waste enormously in Europe. Secondly, we should start developing end-of-waste criteria on EU level. Why? Because it is necessary to have these criteria, and secondly, it is not going well in member states at this moment. We have 3 national end-of-waste criteria regulations in Europe. We need to not impact those regulations, but it's not enough to boost recycling all over Europe. And thirdly, of course, we should ban the landfilling of construction and demolition waste. That should be regulated, we think, on EU level. I talked about asbestos. We need to have this issue solved, preferably at EU level, accepting the fact that asbestos is an issue. We can manage it, and we do not want zero tolerance, because then recycling will be killed. And finally, there is the discussion at this moment on recycled content in the possible amendments of the Eco-Design Directive. We would really like to see that also criteria for recycled aggregates and IBA aggregates would somehow be addressed in this whole chapter, because that is another driver to boost recycling of construction and demolition waste. My last slide. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kuperus, for a very interesting presentation. I would say it was very specific, and there were lots of bias identified, but also pathways forward for circular construction. You've mentioned something that I would call a original sin of the linear construction sector. I mean, the lack of information on building materials and on construction and demolition waste. That is really important. Also, the role of public authorities, not only in regulation, but also in public procurement, in putting the money where their mouth is, I would say. So that was really interesting. And now I would like to ask Mr. Eugenio Quinteri from the European Builders Confederation, the Secretary General of the Confederation, the organization exclusively representing construction SMEs and craftsmen in Europe, to say a few words on competitiveness on secondary materials, design phase, and end of life as part of the same problem solution. Mr. Quinteri, are you there?
Mr. Eugenio Quinteri, can you hear us? I see that Mr. Eugenio is connected. Mr. Eugenio, maybe if you can hear us, just type in the chat. I see there might be some issues, so shall we move to the next speaker?
let's wait half a minute virtually, and then we'll move to the next speaker if Mr. Kintieri cannot present. Mr. Kintieri, are you there? Okay, no answer actually. So we would have to get back to Mr. Kintieri, and now I would like to ask Ms. Kate. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think it's working now. Sorry, but it was frozen. I don't know.
No problem. No problem.
I had to close everything down. All right. I will now share my screen so that we can have a look at the presentation. Just a second, I put it on the wall screen. Can you see the presentation? Hello.
We
Not
cannot
yet.
see the presentation yet. We can see it now.
Okay. Good. So thank you very much for inviting me. It is a pleasure. I mean, I was asked to give a presentation on the competitiveness of secondary raw materials and how let's say the design phase is connected also to the end of life. That's what I've tried to do today. I don't know. Yes, it's working. So just a few words about EVC, who we are. We were established in 1990, and our secretariat is based in Brussels, and we defend and promote the interests of construction SMEs and craftsmen in Europe in an exclusive manner. We have members in different countries. So we are active in different policy fields, and as you can imagine, of course, circular economy is one of our main priorities because it's a priority at European level, but it's also a priority for our SMEs today. When we talk about the life cycle of a building, we have challenges. I think I've simplified the life cycle by dividing this into three parts. So design, execution, and end of life. So we as builders, of course, we have challenges when facing, let's say, design issues. First of all, because most of the existing buildings have not been designed following circular economy principles. So we have no information on the materials that have been used. We then open walls, and then we find out that but the building materials are entangled to each other. But one of I also wanted to underline what is, in my opinion, the main challenge related to the design, but related then to the use of secondary raw materials, like it's the client demand. So the issue that we have today, that is that you have almost no obligation to use sustainable materials. There are subsidies, there is promotion, but there is no obligation. And today we are faced with a market that is experiencing a increasing price of construction materials. I tested myself also with the renovation of my house. The market of secondary raw materials and sustainable materials is usually more expensive. I'm not saying that it's always more expensive, but in general, I would say as an average, it is more expensive. So, and there are the client when talking to us, of course, as builders, that we have to renovate the apartment or build something new, of course, wants also to optimize the cost. And today, the issue is that with increasing price of construction materials, of course, this is becoming even more a challenge. I also would like to mention the fact that sometimes national and local subsidies do not match what is the market reality. I will not name and blame, but I know that, for example, in certain regions you get, for example, an amount, let's say a subsidy, if you go for thermal insulation with any type of material, let's say that is 80 euro per square meter, and then you get 10 euros more if you use, let's say, sustainable material, secondary raw material. So let's say a more sustainable option. But in certain cases, the price of the sustainable material is doubled. So me as a consumer, what I will do, of course, I will go for the synthetic solution. I will go, let's say, for the less sustainable option, because the difference in subsidy is only 10 euro per square meter, but the price of the secondary raw material is 2 times the let's say the non-sustainable one. So of course there is we need to rethink also with the Renovation Wave. We need to rethink also the way we have let's say frameworks for subsidies when it comes to secondary raw materials. That's what I've tried to imagine when we talk about the solutions for the design part, that we need, of course, to improve the data on existing buildings, and of course the digital logbooks that are today developed by the European Commission could be a good solution. We need to create more financial levers to offer more recycled products in the construction industry, and we need to consider and increase also the financial support for recycled material and sustainable products. Could be fiscal policy, could be direct subsidies, could be many options. We have good examples in Europe with best practices, but I think we also need to do more. And as I was saying before, we need to align the renovation subsidies with the current market reality. On the execution part, it was said before, maybe it's the case only for certain member states, but there is sometimes a reluctance to reuse recycled materials or reuse products, because we don't know enough about the consistency and the safety of the products. Sometimes it's a real problem. Sometimes it's only a mental status that we don't trust those products as consumers. And also because sometimes the knowledge of the residual performance of recycled products is not is costly in terms of evaluation. And of course, in terms of execution, we cannot ignore the fact that the sector is faced with, first of all, a labor shortage, but especially, I would say, a labor of qualified labor. So the fact that we need to transform our industry in terms of greening and making more digital the skills that we have, because the sector is changing, clients' demand is changing, and what we need to offer has to change as well. The other issue is on the execution, for the solutions that we need to find in order to respond to those challenges. I think we need to have a clear framework assessing the issues related to residual performance of products and materials in order to support especially the reuse part. We need to assess also the role that standardization can play, and Philip was clear on this when talking about the revision of the construction products regulation, because we think that standardization can play a big role in, let's say, having more standards on recycled products so that we can be safe and certain when we use them. We need to establish also rules on the use of materials in terms of liability and insurability. And when it comes to skills, of course, we need to an effort from all the sides, let's say, of the history. It means we need more support for the EU, national, local level for awareness raising and training programs in the building sector, but we also need to play our part. So I cannot check, and that's the final, let's say, in a simplified manner, we can consider this as the final cycle of a building, the final, let's say, step of the cycle of a building. Then it's the end of life. The point is that recycling and recovery of and use of materials comes especially from a good sorting. Without the sorting, you cannot have you cannot achieve those goals. And the fact is that it's not always easy for our SMEs to sort in an efficient manner, because we work in a small radius around our undertakings, and it's difficult sometimes to find collection or treatment facilities that allow recycling that are close to the construction site. Don't forget that we need to transport a lot of materials, I mean a lot of waste that is generated when renovating a building, and that the recycling facility then are rare and sometimes scattered throughout the countries. As solutions, of course, we foresee that we need to develop a more appropriate number of waste facilities that are close to the construction site, and that this could be waste collection centers or grouping storage platforms. We also should remove also the waste status from all materials and equipment that can be reused. And financially support enterprises that use the general amount of packing on their materials and equipment, and that are active, I would say, on circular sorting before being active on the second process of recycling. That was my last slide, and if you have any question, please do not hesitate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Quintieri. Actually, the questions will be at the end of all the presentations, but I hope, yeah, just like you, that we'll have lots of questions. And I think there are very interesting aspects that were already mentioned. We could delve deeper into it. I mean, for example, your solutions that are actually in line with what other speakers have already said. So it seems that we already know how to go forward. There's only the question. There's only a question of implementation, I would say. And then again, as a very interesting aspect that you mentioned that there's not much recycling facilities actually, and also there's a problem of sorting. So I would say that the cost of sustainable materials is burdened with the lack of economies of scale. So maybe also here the public authorities could somehow influence better systems, better schemes for construction and demolition waste recycling. Thank you very much, Mr. Quintieri, once again. Now we'll move on to Ms. Caitlin Dietz from Sustainable Construction and Circular Economy Office at ECESP, Sustainable Economy and Procurement Team, to support European cities and regions in enabling and promoting closed-loop systems and societies. She will introduce strategic procurement as a tool to accelerate the circular transition in the construction sector. Ms. Dietz, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much to the organizers for the invitation. It's a pleasure to take part in this forum today. Can you see the screen well?
Now we can, yeah.
Great, thanks. So as said, I'm Caitlin Dietz. I work with ECESP Europe, which is Local Governments for Sustainability, a network of local and regional governments committed to sustainable development. And procurement has been praised very much as an enabling tool today. I hope to bring this down to the practice level. We're talking about how to make secondary construction material markets actually work. So let's see what procurement can do on both the supply and demand sides for this. So the argument has been made very clearly, I believe, by previous speakers about the imperative for a transition to a circular economy. I would just like to reemphasize here the importance, especially when talking about getting the market to function and getting market actors on board with this transition, that we also frame it as a business opportunity, as an opportunity to do better in retaining economic value and being regenerative with the economy, but also in adding social and environmental benefits, certainly. Mr. Mosley also very clearly laid out these points about the not only environmental harm caused, and it's a very large scale of construction and demolition waste in Europe, but also on the importance of the construction sector in local economies. And this is imperative, of course, with COVID recovery, but also considering the large percentage of SMEs in the construction sector. So coming on to the power of procurement, public procurement represents 14% of the GDP in Europe. We're talking about a very large sum here. And this is a huge opportunity to as you said, Uwe, to put money where the mouth is for the public pocket. So to achieve the goals that are laid out in action plans and ambitions and policies of the public sector, it's imperative that their own purchases for goods and services, their role as construction client, for example, is used to lead by example, to give visibility to circular or sustainable solutions. This is especially true in the built environment, with the number of public buildings and institutions in public space that are visible not only to market actors, but also to citizens, to mainstream these kinds of solutions. And it's also an opportunity to create a reliable demand. This is imperative for the point on getting a functional secondary materials market. So having a reliable demand that aligns to procurement strategy and ambition that's communicated clearly is a way to drive market innovation, to ensure for market actors that when they innovate and when they invest in transitioning to a circular way of working, that this is rewarded through their opportunities in public contracts. So circular procurement is essentially talking about the purchase of goods and services in a way that aligns to circular principles. So we're talking about minimizing material depreciation, minimizing waste, but also in maximizing the life cycle, utility, and value. We're talking about avoiding doing harm, but rather actually doing good with our purchases to be able to contribute to regeneration of natural systems, and again, aligning to environmental and social goals. So what this can look like in practice? Well, in the minimum requirements, things such as sustainability skills and qualifications can be included. In the award criteria, things like reparability and reusability of components can be considered. When it comes to defining the need for the procurement, this should be done in a way that's for the functional need, for the functional requirement, not for a prescriptive or specific product in itself. This leaves open the opportunity for innovation and for a diversity of solutions. We can also talk about how something is maintained through servicization or through take-back schemes that can put more producer responsibility onto the market side. And certainly the use of tools like life cycle analysis and life cycle costing can ensure that the whole life cycle are taken into account beyond the upfront bottom line. I think the example of cars is a very good one, whether it's really necessary to own a vehicle or rather it's the service of mobility that's the question. We see great examples of circular procurement in city vehicles, for example, when they're used as a car sharing platform for citizens outside of normal office hours so that they spend less time parked. So I come today with this invitation because of my role in the Big Buyers Initiative. The Big Buyers is a platform for strategic public procurement, for alliance between public buyers to align their demand and aggregate it to help drive the market for innovative and sustainable goods and services. This is the DG GROW initiative that ICLE and Eurocities currently manage. And I've been facilitating the working group on circular construction. This began in 2019 and is still running now. So the focus of this group is a collaboration between the buyers you see listed here to exchange experiences, to co-develop procurement criteria and to engage jointly in market dialogues. And we see a number of pilots that have gone on both on the demolition side and on the inclusion of circular principles in renovation or new constructions. And this, of course, involves the development of tools and methods to facilitate this process, and always with the aim of being able to share and upscale and replicate these approaches. So within this group of big buyers, we have identified a number of challenges. I'm happy to see that these align very much with the challenges mentioned by the previous speakers. On the topic of secondary materials, as the topic for today, this is really a challenge because they are by nature heterogeneous, limited in quantity. There's a limited stock that has to fit what the foreseen new use is. And really there's a challenge currently of a lack of reliable data, not only about the availability, about the location, quality, previous use, any type of toxic content, the structural capacity and so on, but also a need for certification of this quality, a need for a third party with a reliable reputation to be able to say that this will work as it's intended to and perform according to the need. And this is an area where we still need further market development, certainly, and where any kind of policy in support of standardization of this and in standardizing material passports and standardizing certification approaches in using things like the end of waste criteria to be able to support the reputation and viability of secondary materials would be a very necessary supporting action. On the other side, we have the need for closing the loop in a very practical way. So connecting the logistics for moving a material from a demolition site to a new construction. And this is often a need for storage space, a need for a logistic actor, and the need for a really clear matching of supply and demand. There we see also an opportunity for digital marketplaces or for a public actor to act as a coordinator, overseeing large construction or renovation projects to align these with the freeing up of other materials through demolitions. There's also an educational need, a need for development of skills on the architects and engineers side, but also in blue-collar construction workers about how to work with secondary materials, and then also in presenting this as an opportunity for construction clients. Digital tools, of course, as Mr. Mosley mentioned, the digital transition has to come hand in hand with this, but the digital tools are both a need for showing the value and confirming the opportunity of a secondary material, but they can be an added cost upfront and a barrier in terms of accessibility, for example, for SMEs, for smaller companies that don't have access to certain softwares or the training to use specific tools. There's also a need as we develop these material passports to have a type of governance to support that they are maintained and that they are kept accurate and to ensure that there's data protection and privacy as needed. So in terms of what can be done on the circular procurement side of things, we can look at this in different steps of the construction value chain. So on the demolition side, we would consider this the supply side for the secondary materials market. When a demolition or renovation is carried out, materials, components from this building can be freed up and then transformed for their new use. So first and foremost, I always want to highlight the need for rethinking and refusing demolition, unnecessary demolition as far as possible, promoting adaptive reuse or deep renovation. And this can be done in procurement by mandating a carbon or cost assessment of renovation versus knockdown and rebuild scenarios. This has been put in practice in the city of Vienna, for example. Second is to take a material inventory and to clearly document the existing components and to evaluate their potential for reuse or recycling. A pre-demolition audit is a way to start this with an inventory of the quantity and condition of these. This can be done by a professional third-party auditor or also by digital tools with scanning and whatnot to get it started. In the contracting of demolition works, this can be separated into several pieces that can include the soft stripping and selective demolition, carefully deconstructing to preserve the value and separating on site. This was already mentioned by previous speakers as well, the importance of maintaining separate materials on site to maximize their value preservation. Third, it's imperative to have planning and partnerships to be able to coordinate the logistics and to be able to ensure that there is a foreseen new use for these materials as well, because otherwise, if you're trucking large quantities of voluminous material around, you can actually be creating more carbon emissions. So it's imperative that for the business opportunity that there is a minimization of the cost and logistics, and this requires optimized planning from as early on as possible. On the new construction side, so we would consider this the demand side for secondary materials. In renovation or construction works that require some new material input, we can start by formulating the ambition and engaging market actors from the get-go. If you're working on innovation, it's important to have all of the actors around the tables to ensure that the realignment of risks and responsibilities is going to facilitate a circular process put into action. Then, as a construction client, public actors have the opportunity to include circular principles in the design. So this can be through having flexible programming, so that if there is a need for a change of fit out or for a change of digital systems, that this can be with minimal future investment. So design for disassembly and making things dismountable, but also allowing for space sharing and optimized use of spaces to avoid the overall build footprint that's needed. Second, on the material selection, in specific non-toxic or even healthy materials for air quality, and also considering the sustainably sourced, responsibly sourced, and the avoidance of labor violations along the supply chain. Materials should be durable, modular, and dismountable. And the use of certificates can be used to inform choices based on the minimal whole life carbon. So there are a number of things such as EPDs that can really mainstream and make it very easy for a procurer to compare side by side different material options. So in this case of material selection, where suitable, of course, reused and recyclable components, materials, or content can supplant virgin material demand and lower the overall footprint of the building. Finally, it's imperative to keep the data for a long life. So when renovations or new buildings are created, that there be a building passport or a BIM model that can keep the maintenance log, and to have a disassembly plan from the get-go, so that this can be foreseen for future maintenance, renovation, or deconstruction at the end of life, to facilitate that process, maintaining as much value as possible. Third, finally, procuring the circular buildings and neighborhoods. So cannot stress enough the importance to move beyond lowest price only procurements. And this can be through increasing the weight of environmental and quality award criteria to decide to whom the tender goes, but also through using whole life cost rather than upfront cost. So total cost of ownership or life cycle costing can facilitate foreseeing the investments over the whole life cycle, which is when the business case for circular economy really comes through as strong. There's a need to recalibrate the roles and risks, again, making the responsibility of producers and ensuring there is a foreseen maintenance plan, and really planning for end of life and minimization of waste from the get-go. Alternative use models, such as sharing spaces, take-back schemes, can be really key in this. You can also consider energy performance contracting, so that it's in the interest of the supplier as well to ensure the sustainable circular performance of the building. Finally, requiring reporting of holistic sustainability indicators and whole life carbon, first as a benchmark, and hopefully we move towards in the coming years setting standard minimum requirements for embodied carbon for build space. And certainly we see the levels framework, life cycle assessments, and EPDs as playing a key role here. Once the data is there, the case for using circular principles in buildings will be much stronger. So to find out more about the work of the Big Buyers Group, you're welcome to check out the Lessons Learned report and or the website. There you can also see specific pilot cases and procurement criteria to take on yourself. Thank you very much, and I look forward to the discussion following.
Thank you very much, Ms. Dietz. That was very interesting, the things you said on specific and real-life examples of how to implement circular construction. What struck me was the thing that you said at the end, that municipalities and public authorities should go beyond looking only at the initial costs in the procurement process. There was also, all the time, it was a mystery to me why a public authority who actually should look at the long horizon of their work is not taking care of the long-term prospects of and costs of a building and concentrating on short-term costs. But I think we would have some time in the question and answer section to delve deeper on this question. And now I would like to invite Mr. Gaetano Bertino, who is a project manager at Alchemia-nova and who works on circular solutions for sustainable architecture, to present his opinion on certification system standards for the use of secondary materials in construction industry. Gaetano, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Hubert, for the introduction. I will share my screen now. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, you can go full
screen.
Okay. Oh, yes.
Thank you. So, as said by Hubert, my name is Gaetano Bertino, and I work for Alchemia-nova, a research and development institute in Vienna. The following session highlights the current certification systems for buildings and products regarding the use of recycled and secondary materials in the construction sector. According to the recent environmental policies and improvement of waste treatment techniques, the construction industry is confronted today with availability of secondary and recycled materials, of which the benefit from their use are well known as alternative for raw materials. We know that recycling saves large amount of energy, eliminates the need to send waste to landfill sites, consequently decreasing the consumption of natural resources to produce new materials. Nowadays, new digital markets and platforms for secondary materials are common, allowing for better decision-making through the entire life cycle of a building and following the core idea that materials should be recovered, recycled, or reused in an openly traded materials market. However, even when the secondary materials satisfied all necessary products demands, this has not always been sufficient for a successful market introduction because of various barriers that can be grouped into three categories: economy, policy, and material properties. The main economic barriers concern waste quality control and the delay in seeing measurable results from the implementation of circular economy concept at different life cycle stages. Challenges that influence the use of recycled materials in new products are also their poor or inadequate quality and the discontinuity of supply. And it's easy to believe that the market acceptance of products produced using waste as input material will be assured only when production costs are lower than for virgin materials. Another obstacle is the lack of standards, experience, and guidance for ensuring the quality of reusable products. Also, the extended product responsibility is not applicable for construction products with long lifespan, implying that the roles and responsibilities of the different actors are not completely clear. Additionally, challenges in data transfer along the value chain lower the trust in the quality of recycled materials. For some of these materials, technological innovations and new business models are required for more high-grade recycling, and these increase the total cost. Also, the lack of available documentation on the origins of waste can create doubts about quality, and these issues affects the chance for CE marking, since the scope of harmonized product standards doesn't cover waste-related materials. So the best way to deal with these problems is by the standardization and the certification of the secondary materials. Standardization is the process of implementing and developing technical standards based on the consensus of different parties. The political and geographical extent of involvement in the process leads to different levels of standardization, from international to provincial. The most important world publisher of standards is ISO, the International Organization for Standardization, while CEN, the European Committee for Standardization, is the major provider of technical specification in Europe, as well as the only European organization recognized for planning, drafting, and adoption of European standards in all the areas of economic activity. Standardization plays an important role in the design and the performance assessment of secondary materials in product, replacing virgin materials, and is often the basis for the certification used in trade and business. Certification is a third-party attestation that specifies requirements related to products that are defined in standards and that they have been respected. Certification involves a conformity assessment, which includes any activity to determine that a product meets relevant requirements, like testing, inspection, auditing, evaluation, or accreditation. All these test methods must be performed by accredited laboratories in order to get uniform results, as well as to ensure proper interpretation of the test and the proper way of taking samples. When the construction material is certified, both suppliers and customers have the assurance about the material quality, and the roles and the liability aspects during the serving time of the product are clarified. In few words, certification is a means of ensuring that the products comply with legal standards. Therefore, it should be considered as an important step for a successful market introduction of secondary materials in the construction sector. In recent years, sustainable certificates for buildings have become firmly established. Although general sustainable construction principles have been prescribed in international standards since 2008, there are still major differences in the assessment of sustainability. And in this slide, we can see some of the most used certification systems. For example, B&B, the building rating system, was developed in Germany in 2008 and gives projects a bronze, silver, or gold label that reflects the extent to which they meet sustainable criteria, focusing on the indicators dismantling, separation, and recovery to rate the planning of new buildings to be recycling friendly. In recent years, the DGNB, the German Sustainable Building Council, has developed this certification system to cover a wide range of building types and applications. 10 criteria include recycling aspects in the broad sense, and the labels range from bronze up to platinum. The Breen certification system is the world's oldest rating system for environmentally friendly construction. It was developed in the United Kingdom, and this system focuses strongly on the planning process and the recycling aspects involving building materials that are included in some different criteria groups. LEED, the Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design, is a certification system developed in the United States and used also in Europe, for example in Italy, that rates a project on 4 levels based on the number of sustainability points achieved. HQE is the French certification system for building construction and management and promotes best practices, sustainable quality, and offers also expert guidance through the lifetime of the building project. Finally, I would like to mention the Austria's most widely used building quality passport, the UGNI-IBO EcoPass. To identify the best form of recycling, materials are classified in 5 label scale that measures the recyclability and their potential for incineration or disposal. So, while rating systems examine buildings quality comprehensively, product certification concentrates on ecological and social criteria during the life cycle of individual building products regarding their manufacturing process, their usage until the end of life phase. The international series of standard ISO 14020 provides guidance on using and providing environmental information on products on voluntary basis. There are different types of declaration. For example, the environmental declaration that's defined in ISO 14021, the type 2, are voluntarily self-declaration issued based on the manufacturer's sole responsibility and can contain details on a product recycled content. In contrast, the environmental labels, as defined in the ISO 14024, the type 1, require certification by a third party. They are of an evaluative nature and set out the particular environmental quality of a product, distinguishing it from other products made for the same purpose. The best known Type 1 environmental labels for products and services of all kinds is Blue Angel, that is also the oldest one in the world. Nature Plus certificate imposes resource conservation requirements, usually rating products with a proportion of renewable and raw materials by mass. Other relevant Type 1 environmental labels are the FSC and the PEFC, which certify wood products from sustainable forestry. Finally, Type 3 EPD, that stands for Environmental Product Declarations, as defined in the ISO 14025, provide complex quantitative and verified information based on a life cycle assessment, quantifying a product's contribution to climate change. EPDs usually contain information on the raw materials used, the recycled content, and the recovery of disposal instructions. However, EPDs that are effective require the use of standard factors in their formulation, and the global harmonization of EPD standards remains a challenge. In conclusion, for the market introduction of secondary materials, many problems need to be overcome. A successful market introduction depends heavily on a certification, and it deals with the interest of all the involved parties. Best results can be expected when authorities, suppliers, and users of new material collaborate by consulting each other about the technical aspect and the demand concerning the products, for example. Collaboration between suppliers makes joint investment possible in order to obtain certifications and to increase knowledge about these products. When certification procedures are set up in dialogue with all parties of interest, they will satisfy demands of both government and customers, and they will be clearer for the suppliers. On the other hand, when the certification procedures are determined only by governmental parties, for example, without any kind of consulting, this can even result in procedures that are not supported by the involved users or that are impossible to comply with. Thanks you all for the attention. I will be happy to continue the discussion during the next question and answer session.
Thank you, Gaetano. I think that from your presentation, we can clearly see that there are a lot of certifications, eco-labels, and standards that are already on the market. The one problem there is how to implement them broadly among all stakeholders on the market. So this will be very interesting to hear in the question and answer session how to approach this. And then now we'll move to Michael Moradiello del Molino, Manager and Head of Real Estate C2C at Dresden Sommer. And he will tell us a few words on good practices in circular construction. Mr. Moradiello del Molino, are you there?
I think, Mr. Michael, you are on mute. Could you please try to unmute?
Sorry. Yeah, I'm here. Sorry. Let me just share my screen. Yep. Voila. Is it okay? I hope so.
Yeah.
So, my name is Michael Moradiellos. I'm based in Brussels, and I'm responsible for company EPEA, which is now part of Dresden Sommer. And I would like to present the best practice, one example of a project that we are doing, which the name is the World Trade Center 1, 2, or also the name is ZIN. And I will. So just a quick recap, because we discussed before the Circularity in the previous presentation, and also material passport and other related topics to circular economy. So the company EPEA is the one founded by Michael Braungart in Hamburg in 1987, and who has developed the principle of Circularity and the book and the certifications. And this company joined in 2019 another company, Dresden Sommer, which is responsible for project management and in the construction sector. And together, Now we are working from products and certification, but apply to building and urban development. And I'm responsible for the real estate development, combining those principles, circular economy, and with the construction sector, planification and construction. And I think all the topics presented before, we are actually using them, developing them. We have our own material passport, digital tools, etc., etc. So I'm very happy to present. I wanted to talk about all, but I'm just focusing today on this business case because I think that's also useful for you. So that was 2 of the 4 towers of the World Trade Center in Brussels, situated in front of the North Station. We are working for the owner, Befimo, which is coming from the public sector and now private activities. And the idea was to develop a new project, circular one, to go to a new tenant, which is the Flemish government. As you know, in Belgium, we have different entities. So in Brussels, they were looking for 70,000 square meter close to others offices they have in the business district. And we were able to attract them with a contract because we developed the most circular project in the tender, based on cradle-to-cradle principles, but also about a strong urban mining process. And that's where I would like just to stop today a few minutes. So we have the existing tower here, and then we have the new project which is now under construction, with renovation of the 2 towers and a third one in the middle. So just to put in practice how we start a project, and the architects and the developer, they wanted to demolish everything and just start a new process with a new project. And we just started at the design phase, where we wanted to do the inventory of all materials and also provide a tool to discuss how much we can keep and how much we can recycle, upcycle, reuse. And then it was integrated within the discussion with the architects, and we decided to change the strategy. So we started by calculating the weight of all materials in the existing buildings without digital model, without digital plans, with the help, of course, of the architects, of the engineers, to define where the materials are in the process, in the building, in the foundations, the basement, the different floors of the parking, the plinth, and then the core of the elevator, and the slabs of all the towers, and of course the facade. So just to have a picture of all materials and qualities everywhere, and then also to have the final weight of the project, to also understand in terms of percentage how much materials we are keeping, etc., etc. This is something we are also doing now for most of owner or portfolio owner, and to put that information in the platform Madaster, which is a material cadastre with digital twin and information. So we can also increase the quality of information for further demolition of renovation. So when we know what we have, we know what we can do. And as presented before, also we have a process where we connect with the industry, we do some tests, we collect some materials, and then we work all together how to reuse or recycle those materials. Then we come up with a calculation of the existing project and how much we will reuse, and including maintain, of course, the structure, and then specific materials, how we can reuse it on site, how we can reuse it on elsewhere. And now there is, thanks to this project, which was the first at this scale in Belgium, at least, other countries I know, we really started a new market for reuse component, and we see other projects that are looking for materials from the reuse sector, and also industry or companies that are reusing, remanufacturing those materials to supply those other projects where they are looking for reused material. So it was really an activator of the market in Brussels and in Belgium for different materials. And then we also started collaboration with the industry. We'll show it later to upcycle the aggregates, the glass, and other materials. So that's part of the process. And then for the new project, we also state how much material we will use, because we have a new construction in the middle, and how much materials will come back to the project through the circular concrete. And then for the new materials, we had a scope with the client, and also to convince the public entity that we will have 97% of the new materials for the offices that will have a Circularity certificate attached. And that's also possible because now with the contractor, we are pushing the market. We are asking the suppliers to go for certification and to enter into this world of knowledge, information, transparency, recycled content, and recyclability. And of course, to eliminate harmful materials that will define those products into waste in the future. And that's also having a huge impact on the certifications. We have seen before different certifications. We are asking for Circularity, but there are other certificates, and it's really activating the conscience of the manufacturer that they need to provide proof, they need to provide certifications, and they also need to increase the quantity of recycled content or recyclability of their products. So one project within the project was what we defined at the first stage of the project as a green concrete without any kind of framework. It was, we want to do a very good concrete. And one of the availability because of the demolition was that we had a lot of concrete to crush, and typically those concrete are crushed into aggregates, and those aggregates are used for landscape, for road and landscaping. And as we are in the center of the city, that was not an option for us, of course, but we wanted to go a step further. So we did a precise estimation of how much concrete we have in the building. We did some tests on the compression, on the heavy metals, on Chrome 6, to be sure that those aggregates are complying with the C2C certification process. And then under discussion with the Minister of Environment of Brussels, the architects, the control bureau, and then the demolition company and the engineers to be able to sort and separate the good concrete to go for a plant outside just near Brussels, and to crush it, all the separation process, and then to have the right dimension of aggregates. At the end, we were able to reuse 12% of the existing concrete because we wanted to use for a structural purpose on the new construction. So we also convince local producer. Our project is just behind here, so very near to the site, to go for a C2C certificate for on-site pour concrete, which is also new in Belgium, and by integrating also the exact same aggregates that we had recycled from the site. And it was starting poured a few months ago. Now we're under construction, and that's also some major work that was we were able to achieve thanks to the participation of the industry, of the authorities, and of the developer, the owner, which had this high standard. And now it's just available for other projects, other construction within the region, and that's really also increasing the quality of those materials in the region. And another investigation and project we did is how to increase the recycling process of glasses coming from demolition waste. of this building. And we also start a process with first to reuse, to upcycle those glasses. There are some investigation about certain processes of reusing, not for facade because we don't have the correct energy performance, but for other usage in interior partitions or other types of project. But at the end, the most interesting was to discuss with the manufacturer, the Saint-Gobain, Guardian, and AGC Glass, just to see what happens if they take back those glasses, they remanufacture going through the industrial process, and then they can show in the EPD documents declarations that they have more recycled content, that they are able to integrate today. Those materials, they have less carbon intensity processes, which is also good for the LCA of the product, and how we could, on the feasibility, on-site feasibility, deconstruct the facade in a way that the existing glasses is not like this in a container all together with a mixed, but on one piece on the floor and then to the third party and to go to the industry. And that's something that we can also imagine with projects with this size, where you have so much square meter that you really have leverage and you can address those topics with those companies. And we didn't achieve this process in this project, but now one of the facade manufacturer, glass manufacturer, they are offering these services for other projects because they've identified that was actually possible. So that was my last slide. We can have some questions, but I just wanted to share that what's important for us, there are the tools, the procurements, and the methodologies. But when we address such project with such scale, it also have a local impact on the legislation, on the authorities, on the industry, and that's really also needed to face all the parties, but everyone together, and then we have a common scope and an objective for achieve a circular economy in the building environment.
Thank you, Mr. Morgielos. It's very nice to hear that such projects could be then activator of a broader adoption of circular construction. Let's move on to next examples of good practices by Henriette Twin, leading senior advisor at the Confederation of Danish Industry. Ms. Twin, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me. I'll try to do it as short as possible. I was told that I had 5 minutes. Yeah, my presentation is a bit different because I was told to say a few words about the new European Bauhaus, and as we haven't talked about it during today, I'll just share a few words with you about what happened here and when it happened. So a few words about the Bauhaus, a few words about the Danish project, which is a part of the Bauhaus idea, and then a specific case called in Danish, Ressourceblokken. But almost a year or more than a year ago, at the State of the European Union, the President Ursula von der Leyen told that she wants next generation EU to kickstart a European Renovation Wave. And she also mentioned, for I think most of us, for the very first time, the new European Bauhaus. This was quite new, and she also did another, or the Commission suggested another new thing, was that this new European Bauhaus should develop as a bottom-up approach, and they have done so. And they said, okay, consider this being a movement. So I just highlighted a few things. It should be a movement that explore how we live better together, how we connect people, And the last one here is how we develop lead markets in sustainability. And when we look at this in the Renovation Wave and in other aspects of the new European Bauhaus, it should be also beyond buildings. It's where we live and the spaces that we share and where we live. And each time we think new European Bauhaus, every time we should consider sustainability, aesthetics, and inclusion. So 1 year later, so a couple of weeks ago, when she held her latest State of the European Union, she said, and if the European Green Deal has a soul, then it is the new European Bauhaus. So no less, it's the soul of the Green Deal. After her presentation, a communication came out for the new European Bauhaus. There were a lot of different initiatives in this. One of them is the Commission opened on the 28th the call for 5 lighthouse demonstrators around Europe that should show us how and showcase how we could consider new European Bauhaus. So we have initiated this work since the very early of January this year. We are a group of partners that are trying to develop this, see if we can come up with ideas of being a lighthouse demonstrator, and we are currently looking for European partners. Just saying. We have worked and invited more than 300 people from 150 different organizations, businesses, individuals to take part in this process. And we see that the biggest problem here is overshooting. And what we have done is we have worked harder on different topics where we could develop the new European Bauhaus, and it's on social, it's on nature, and on resources. And just the one on resources I've brought here because this is about the actual case that I will tell you about. So how do we use or ensure zero waste? And this example is upcycling of the social housing from the 60s and 70s. The Danish government came out with a plan for renovating and demolish actually approximately 15 so-called ghettos around in Denmark. A lot of them are built from concrete. So how do we upcycle and recycle and reuse the concrete structure? So this is a group, it's a project that's currently ongoing, and they just finished the first phase. It's 6 different architectural companies. It's a demolition company, it's a contractor, and the Institute for Technology, along with the University of Aalborg, working on this project. Don't worry, I'll tell you very brief, but in the end, you'll find links to this quite interesting project. They have mapped these 15 social housing blocks. They have picked out 2. And they are looking into reusing and upcycling potential in concrete structures on 2 of these sites. And they have, for the first phase, a scalable methodology for upcycling of concrete structures. And keeping in mind, again, the aesthetics, the sustainability, and also inclusion. So they did this. The inclusion by inviting the different companies, and in particular 6 different architectural firms. They also invited the residents at these 2 housing blocks to develop what would their wishes be for the new way to construct the buildings. And during this, they have done construction flea markets, creation of common rooms. So that was just a few ways of involving and inclusion of the residents. And this part, and it's also what the previous speakers talked about, how do we make the most and the best use of the construction materials? And here it's concrete. And often we crush it and use it as filling in the roads. But if we could maintain both a lot of the concrete structure, as well as reusing the concrete elements. So this is what they have done here. They have tried preserve the structure, the concrete structure, and then cutting out the elements. And then what couldn't be used here, then try to upcycle as much as possible. And as a result of this, they gave the same criteria to the 6 different architects, and the project they came up with, in average, the 6 different designs save 47% CO2 emission compared to if they have done this with new construction. And so with the aesthetics, the 6 different architectural firms came up with 6 very different, very interesting, high aesthetic, high quality project using the existing materials, using and reusing the building materials that were already there. Of course, supplemented with virgin materials, but also different other materials. And I think it's very interesting to see that you can actually have such different approach and way of designing this with the same building materials. Yeah, so very, very short. I'm sorry about giving 5 minutes. It was a bit hasty. But here you'll find the links for the Danish initiative, the Irresistible Circular Society, a white paper which I can recommend reading because there are a lot of good ideas of how you can do the circular economy within construction, and then a bigger, the bigger project, Resource Bloggen. And there will be a larger summary in English.
Thank you very much, Ms. Thun. This was indeed a very short presentation, but a very interesting one. So thank you very much for it. And I wanted to just say that I really like the motto that you set, the motto of the project you told us about. We need to stop overshooting. I think this is something that we have to keep in mind when I'm thinking about all circular projects and circular concepts. So that was very, very helpful. Thank you. And now at last we have the question and answer session. There are a few questions already posted on the chat, but if you have any questions you would like to ask our presenters directly, then please raise your hand. So we'll be watching out for the raised hands, and we'll actually start with the question that was posted on the chat to Mr. Gert Kuperus. And may I say that any presenter can also add to the answers to the question posed. So feel free to take stand. Mr. Kuperus, there was a question on which member states are performing high quality construction and demolition waste recycling. And I would add to the question, what factors are necessary for the quality of construction and demolition waste recycling to be of high quality?
Yes, thank you, Hubert, and thank you for the question. Actually, I a little bit wanted to avoid it to pinpoint member states saying this member state is doing well, that member state is not doing well. But I think most of us know that in, for instance, the Netherlands, Flanders, Germany, Austria, there, and Switzerland, by the way. So therefore, it's 4 to 5. Switzerland is not a member of the EU, of course, but they are in our association. But these countries perform very well with high recycling rates and high quality recycling. And what has been decisive for that is, as it was in my presentation, actually is the willingness of the member state to do so. What we see is that the member states, the authorities, they start a discussion with the entrepreneurs saying, okay, we have a common goal. How are we going to achieve this goal? So for instance, in Flanders, in the Netherlands, they have drafted a implementation plan for construction demolition waste decades ago, saying we have a goal, what is necessary to achieve this goal, and who is responsible for what action. And as it turns out, the action of bringing waste to a recycling plant is an action for the authorities, of course, that is legislation. But the recyclers are responsible to implement a good infrastructure for recycling and to assure that they produce high quality recycling materials. But for that also you need a framework how to test the leaching behavior of recycled aggregates. So that again is a task of an authority to set a framework how to assess the environmental suitability of materials. So that is basically the main factor, is the willingness of the authorities to do so. And if they are willing to do so, there are in every member state, there are entrepreneurs wanting to recycle C&D waste. I'm pretty sure of that. We've seen it, by the way. And but they are waiting for this discussion and this cooperation with the authorities.
So to put it in a nutshell, the burden of responsibility mostly lies on the public authorities, right?
I think at this, what we have seen is that it does not happen in member states where there is not the clear willingness of authorities to achieve recycling. And it's very plain to say so and very hard perhaps, but it is really the truth. To give you one example, we have had 20 years ago discussions with the president and the authorities of South Tyrol. So it's a province in Italy, quite independent actually. And they said, we want to achieve recycling. We want to achieve recycling in our province. And that was a decision by the president himself. And they came to us and they said, how do we achieve this? How do we do this? So we brought all our information to this province, and they were able to achieve in just a very few years a very high level of recycling. But the main kickoff was actually to say, we need it, we want it, and it has to happen. And it's just as simple as that.
Yeah, thank you very much. Now, building on your answer, I would like to ask a question from the audience to Mr. Quintieri on how can we use the recycled material and boost secondary material use and consumption. Could you pinpoint just 2 or 3 main factors?
Hubert, I would like just to point out that we have to move towards the end of the session, so maybe the answer more short. And I'm going to ask to Milda if we can have more time to finalize the session to go through all the things we have to do by the way.
Yes, the meeting can continue after the 12:30. It's not going to be finished. It can continue.
Thank you.
So, if I may, we may continue, Mr. Quintieri. Mr. Quintieri, please answer.
Yeah, just quickly. So, I think we need to boost the role of standardization to make to increase the confidence of the market towards secondary raw materials. I think the other issue is, of course, financial support, because at least as a trigger then to increase the market and the request and the demand for this material, and we need to rethink the system that we have today in place for subsidizing renovation works. As I said, there is a huge difference between buying, let's say, a non-sustainable material and a sustainable one in terms of price. We know this, but we have the impression that the subsidy system doesn't follow. So that's why the demand is also still low. Those were my points. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And next question for Ms. Caitlin Dietz actually was already posed. How can we get rid of this short-term approach of public authorities to procurement, to focusing on initial price, for example? Are there any options to get rid of this unfortunate approach?
Hi, thanks for the question. Yes, I was also typing a response now to Laura about how circular procurement can be complementary to the GPP criteria, which are being revised currently for buildings, also to include more circularity and to be better aligned with a whole life approach, along with the levels and the Renovation Wave, right? Yes, about how procurement of local authorities can be more aligned to a life cycle approach, a long-term investments. There are several mechanisms when selecting a procurement procedure. For example, in creating a dynamic purchasing system or an innovation partnership in which a public authority can engage with the market actors in a more long-term way. So creating a relationship of trust and of collaboration towards a common goal. And in this sense, it's also not infringing upon competition because multiple suppliers can be included within such a platform. So we have, for example, in Copenhagen, a collaborative forum on emission-free construction works, in which there are several suppliers and working together with the municipality and interest organizations to work towards different solutions, and all of these suppliers are also able to align themselves to the city's long-term incremental steps towards emission-free works. So I would say looking towards more market engagement is a really important step for this, to see what is possible for the market to offer and to communicate clearly the ambition of the public authority to move towards more circularity, so that you can walk together on this path. Otherwise, the GPP criteria certainly are a great tool that's really ready-made, has a supporting guidance on how to apply it, that can really ensure that no small municipality is left behind on this kind of thing. It's not only your large capital cities that are leading in innovation, but really all cities can work together through market engagement to push their local ecosystem along towards this transition. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the extensive answer. And yeah, just like Laura said a few minutes ago, we are running late actually, so we'll need to move to the next part of our circular talk. And if you have any questions left that you really want to get an answer for, please raise your hand now, and maybe we'll find time later to try to answer them. And if not, let's move to the polls.
Yes, Hubert. Maybe according to, we had some contact with the Commission. Now maybe we can move to the closing remarks, and then if we have time, we will do the poll after. So I'm pleased to give the floor to Josefina Lindblom of the European Commission.
Thank you very much. And can you confirm that you hear me then? No?
Yes, we can.
Hear me?
Yes,
Yeah,
we can.
Okay, very good. There was a bit of a worrying silence there. So then I will try to share my screen, and if you could confirm when you see that. Is that all right?
No, we cannot see it.
You can or you cannot?
We cannot.
I cannot see it. Well, that's worrying then.
Josephina, would you like me to share your presentation for you? I have it open.
Yeah, okay. I don't
Shall we
understand
do
why though,
that?
but yeah, as we're short of time, please go ahead. Or let me just try one more time.
Okay.
Does that work?
Yes, that's fine. That's working.
Okay. Okay. Very good. Thanks. So did the same thing, but not sure why. So I'm here to talk about levels then at the end, which you have already heard a bit about throughout the day, and I will also try to make some intelligent reflections on what we have heard in relation to this. So why circularity in the first place? Because this has really been the topic of the day. You already heard a couple of the speakers already from the ESC, for example, reiterating the resource use, the large resource use in the construction sector. You see the numbers here. I will not go through them more in detail, but that is really why circularity in this sector is so extremely important. I wanted to share something which you may or you may not have seen before, but which I think is very telling. On this graph, you have on the y-axis, you have carbon emissions, and on the x-axis, you have the time. And you have this separated for the operational carbon, which is really the carbon that is emitted when we're using the building, so for heating and cooling, etc. And the embodied carbon, which is the carbon which is sort of embodied in the materials that we are using, so which is emitted when we are producing materials, etc. And throughout the life cycle as well. And several of the speakers today have sort of been talking about this whole life carbon, looking at the full picture. But I just wanted to make absolutely sure that everybody is in line and understands what it is that we are talking about. And what we are doing in the Commission now is that we are trying to shift the focus from the operational carbon only, which has currently been the case, to actually go further and look at the full life cycle. And for example, we saw a very interesting Danish example where the speaker was referring also to how circularity can reduce the whole life carbon, so also the carbon that is linked to the materials. Levels is a common language. So it is a common language, provides a methodology to assess and report on sustainability performance of buildings. And we have been working on this for the last 5-6 years. It was published last year. It targets new buildings and renovation projects equally. It is for residential and offices. So with that, we cover by far the most part of our buildings in Europe. And this is a very detailed methodology which has been developed together with the sector and member states. It was a great collaborative process. It is based on best practice industry standards. And it went through a very thorough test phase as well with the sector. I want to stress that Levels is an entry-level tool for the mainstream market. So it really aims at reaching out to those building professionals and member states as well, for that matter, who are not so familiar or doesn't have that much experience of life cycle thinking, but reaching out to them and sort of start to take them on this journey. That doesn't mean that the really good and advanced and experienced performers are not very interested as well. They have been part of developing this tool as well. And we, for example, the certification schemes, which were mentioned also by a previous speaker, because the certification schemes are also looking to align themselves with Levels. So what areas does Levels actually cover then? Well, it covers resource use and environmental performance during a building's life cycle, and there we look at energy, materials, and water. But we also look at health and comfort, and life cycle cost, value, and risk. I think we heard quite a lot about the materials today. Of course, this is an event on circularity. We heard from Mr. Coopers on how recycling of inert construction demolition waste is not too complicated and it is not too expensive, but at the same time how requirements are needed. In particular, he was asking, I think, for consistent legislation, and he was not the only one throughout the morning. It is very important to have the willingness of public authorities to be able to tackle this part on materials. But we also heard from the EBC and ECLA about the challenges for the sector in this regard, and how this is often linked to certification missing or not fully tackling what is needed, the quality, or rather the trust in the quality of the material, and how there can be a fluctuating or actually limited quantity of recycling material to work with in the first place. So the material part here is very important. It's tricky, but it is important, and I couldn't agree more on the fact that policy has a great impact or a great responsibility to drive this. We see already how levels is influencing policy. My colleague from DG GROW was mentioning the revision of the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, which is actually now taking the first steps to introduce elements of whole life carbon into building legislation. We are also working together on a roadmap for reduction of whole life carbon up to 2050. And he was also mentioning the first steps in the Energy Efficiency Directive to recommend public authorities to take these aspects into account. We see how sustainable finance, which has also been referred to here, in the first delegated act that came out in spring, there is now for new buildings technical screening requirement, or criterion, I should say, on whole life carbon for big buildings. And in the next delegated act, which will be linked to circularity, again, the levels indicators will have an impact. So yeah, I should say that the levels indicators have impacted the policy initiatives that I have been talking about here. And of course, public procurement, that has received a lot of interest today and attention. We see the whole life carbon in the Energy Efficiency Directive correctly, and we are revising the existing green public procurement criteria. This is an action under the Renovation Wave as well, so that this will more thoroughly be based on circularity, and we're doing that by applying the levels framework. We believe that just as ECLA was referring to, it is really green public procurement that can provide consistent demand and which can get the sector going. Of course, we heard from EPEA about a great and very large project where a great example of how public procurement can really drive circularity. And we also heard the Danish example, which is a smaller one, in Ressourceblocken, how upcycling can really, in renovation, can really reduce whole life carbon emissions as well. So for sure, green public procurement will certainly play an important role in driving this agenda. Regarding the key benefits of levels then, it is a common language using best practice industry standards, and it has been developed, as I said, in a large collaborative process. It tracks performance throughout the full life cycle, and it is really trying to do so in a way that supports the, if I can call it, the mainstream market, or at least not just the best performers. And in that sense, we also understand in the context that we have that it brings accountability and investor confidence. It also enhances dialogue and collaboration between stakeholders, and I think that is something that has come up quite a lot today, and it supports sustainability skills and understanding if you do this together. We heard from ENEA in the very beginning that the industry is certainly very willing to go circular, but that collaboration is needed, and I fully take that on board, and that's what we hear as well, and we have been hearing that for the last 5-6 years. So levels, it doesn't provide all the answers, of course, but I think it's a very good tool to start that communication and that collaboration between stakeholders, because it really shows how different building professionals need to work together to drive that forward. We also heard from the EBC and ECLA as well, for that matter, about the importance of skills. And again, levels will not provide all the skills, but I think if you dig into that framework and start to work with the indicators and work together in a collaborative way, skills can really be improved. And that is what we've heard from those who have started their journey as well. Furthermore, levels underpins future EU and the national policies. We see that happening now, not just at the EU level, but also in different member states. And we see it definitely as a way of supporting the future-proofing of buildings for carbon neutrality in the way that it takes into account the full life cycle. With that, I would like to thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Lindblom. Laura,
Yes.
can we have the polls or should we?
Yes, we can move to the last point. Maybe I can ask Paola to show the presentation. Yes, but just really quickly, just to invite you to answer this survey for of the World Bank at this link. Also, Milda put this in the chat. And then the next slide, please. We don't have the time now to do the pool, but I would like to invite you to go to the LinkedIn page of EU Circular Talks, and there we can continue our discussion and also answer to the poll. So we are finished. Thank you very much for being here, for your contribution, for the work done before, and also for the work we have done in the future. Thank you very much. Have a nice continuing, and bye-bye.
Thank you all. Looking forward for the next Circularity Talk.
Thank you. Bye.